Darryl, thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, no worries at all. Thank you for inviting me.
Darryl, you've had quite a career. Oracle, Deloitte, SAP, and today you started your company about 5 years ago in ocean conservation. How does
Mm.
one jump from the corporate world to that?
Yeah. It's not apparent at first sight. So I've been diving for well, many years, decades. And it's the ocean has always been a passion of mine, and my wife. And so when we first arrived in the UAE, and I came here to actually open up all of the microstrategy offices in the region. Um, my wife said to me, "Hey, you know what?" She was actually pregnant at the time, so she was unable to go diving, unable to eat sushi, all the stuff she loves, she couldn't do. And so she said to me, "Hey, listen, after our last son was born, it was like we should get a boat, we should go out diving, we should, get our life back." And so we started looking on Dubizzle, as you do in Dubai, and well, I found a really nice boat that I liked for diving. And so I went out and I came back in the evening and my wife said to me, "So do we have a boat?" I said, "Actually, no, we have two boats and a dive center." Um, so that was how it all started. And that was 11 years ago, actually. And I was kind of running that with, an on-site management team up in Dibba in Fujairah, while I was actually managing the growth of MicroStrategy across the region. And this was my little place, my haven of peace, where I could finally get off an airplane or, out of meetings or whatever. I would escape up there and go diving with my wife and you know, my family and stuff. And yeah, turned into a pretty popular dive center. And then around 5 years ago, we started to see a lot of evidence of, coral getting, um, yeah, pretty battered. I mean, between the high sort of temperatures we had in the summertime, and there was also some probably some issue with levels of pollution of different sorts and stuff like that. And yeah, the reefs got really stressed. And we were looking at this and saying, we can't just swim by and close our eyes on this. We need to do something. And that was how Project Reframe actually came into being around, yeah, like you say, around 5 years ago. And essentially, I recruited some marine biologists. We sat around and cogitated and planned and plotted and worked out how we were going to create a sustainable system for actually, helping these reefs to A, continue growing and surviving, but B, to also create kind of safety stock, so if something bad happened again, then we'd be able to keep enough of it so that we could bring it back to the natural reefs again, out on our kind of, if you want to call it, coral farm. So that's actually how it all started. It was a hobby that turned into a flyby that was a bit horrifying, and then we said, "Hey, we can't leave this, and we need to do something about it." And then I started getting so into it. It was like, you know what? I kind of don't really want to do corporate stuff anymore. I want to go sort of swim in the ocean and do all this fun stuff and grow corals and just kind of enjoy life as well. I'm kind of getting towards 60 now, so it's a good time to do it, before you can't. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's how it all started.
I mean, it's fascinating. It's your typical tech tech career, retirement, goes on a sailboat and disappears into the ocean kind of vibe, isn't it?
Pretty much. I don't have the
But
straw hat, but yeah,
yeah,
it's pretty much that.
but question here. So you've been diving in the UAE for years. Do you see the coral degrade year after year, or is it like a decades long process? Why did you
Well,
think it was so urgent?
so basically, there's a few different reasons here. So, um, you really have two sides of the UAE when it comes to coral. So you've got the West Coast, obviously Abu Dhabi, Dubai, up to Ras Al Khaimah. And then we've got the East Coast with Fujairah and sort of Sharjah coastal area on that side as well. Um, those two seas are very different. So you have the Arabian Sea on the Dubai and Abu Dhabi side, and that is essentially a very large and not very deep lake with some level of tidal flow. So, with the very hot summers we get, and obviously a lot of development around its coastline. I mean, not just in the UAE, but as you go sort of south, and you've got Qatar, you've got Kuwait, you've got all the countries that are also developing, tourism and stuff like that for many years now. Um, that whole ocean has been put under a lot of stress from anthropogenic reasons. Putting up we've had islands dredged, we've had hotels constructed, et cetera, et cetera. All of that creates sedimentation, which obviously has not the best effect on marine ecosystems. So then you add in the temperatures, the water reaches in the summer, what we call SSTs. And I think last year we came very close, or even did hit 38 degrees in Abu Dhabi, which is huge. Now, corals in our region, I mean, they've adapted over time to the water, which is getting continuously warmer and warmer every year by, fractions or whole degrees. And they can adapt to a certain level of stress, but after that, they bleach. And, if the water temperature doesn't decrease fairly quickly, then they'll actually die. Um, Common misconception, bleaching means death. It doesn't. It's an intermediate stage on the way to death. Um,
So they can still
so
be recovered if
they
they're
can sometimes,
really.
correct. So basically, if you look at coral, it's a symbiotic relationship between two different things. So you've got the coral, the creature, which is um, it's a creature that's actually quite like a jellyfish, but it is an animal. And then it lives with a special type of algae called zooxanthellae. And it's the algae that actually gives the coral its color. So when you see these like beautiful pinks and greens and yellows and whatever, it's actually the plant that lives inside the polyps with the coral animals that gives it that nice color. And so what you have is the plant that does what plants do, which is, take energy from the sun, photosynthesize it into sugars and energy. The animal feeds from that during the day, and then, does what all animals do when they've had a good feed. And then the plant enjoys all of that sort of manure, if you like, to sort of fertilize it and keep it happy. And so you've got this beautiful little, circular relationship there. The issue comes when the coral gets very stressed, and this can happen because of high temperatures. The corals in our region are pretty generically happy up to about 32, 32.5 degrees centigrade, which is probably the most thermally tolerant corals in the world. As soon as we get above that, the 33s, the 34s, we start to see levels of bleaching. And it really then depends on how long the temperature remains high. If it remains high for a week, 10 days, the recovery is actually fairly quick because the corals have adapted to recover quickly to that. If it lasts months, which it has done in the past couple of years, then you're looking at widespread bleaching and probably some death as well, some mortality. So we've got this big lake, which is getting saltier and saltier and hotter every summer. Partly just because of the heat, evaporation, it's increasing the salinity levels, but also because of the desalination plants and stuff that are all around, those kind of coastal developments. We need water. So a lot of desalination plants. And some of the older ones, they spit out a lot of kind of salt waste, if you see what I mean, which is increasing the salinity. All of those things are not great for the ocean, not just for corals, but for a lot of different species. So the West Coast has been under some pretty severe pressure for a while now. The East Coast is different in the sense that it's, or we call it the Arabian, or rather the Oman Sea, um, but it's actually the Indian Ocean. It's the edge of the Indian Ocean, which is obviously a very deep ocean with a lot of, beautiful currents and nutrients and flows. And so corals have a better survival rate on that side because the conditions are a lot better. There's also a lot less development on that coastline than there
It's
is
less
on the west.
populated too, right?
Less populated. You know, if you go right up to the Musandam, sort of, that peninsula that goes into the Straits of Hormuz, I mean, the population levels are very, very low, and the corals up there are gorgeous. I mean, they're pristine. There's nothing wrong with them, and they seem to survive a lot better when the water gets hot as well, because I guess they're not getting the pressure from human interactions, pollutants going into the water, et cetera, et cetera. Um, so the bottom line is that we need to make sure that we protect these different stocks because they're a vital part of the ecosystem. I mean, 25% of the ocean species are born or live on coral reefs, which is pretty impressive when you put it into absolute numbers, which puts it somewhere around the same number of species that live in the Amazon rainforest, to give you an
Wow.
idea. And coral only actually inhabits between 1 and 2% of the ocean floor globally. So, small patches that are extremely rich in biodiversity. You take them out, and it's almost like you take a city out. People are not going to want to live in rubble, right? So they're going to move, and that's exactly what the fish and the other species that inhabit the reefs do. As soon as the reef dies, they move on somewhere else where they can get food and shelter and the services they need. So basically, if we don't protect the reefs, we're going to be seeing the beginning of what we call basically a trophic cascade, which means that if you have a food chain and you take out the bottom part of it, then the top part of it collapses straight afterwards.
Yeah.
Just imagine for farmers if we took out grass, there's no
Mm.
more grass.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that means there's no more horses, no more cows, there's no more sheep, there's no more, yeah. And it's exactly the same problem that we have in the ocean. So we got to protect them for that reason. And the second reason is that they are a very precious international resource. Um, anyone who kind of followed the news over the last couple of years, the Florida reefs got absolutely beaten to death last year with extremely high water temperatures. It was all over the news. They lost a ton of coral over there. The same has happened to the Great Barrier Reef. Repetitive years over the last couple of decades. I think we're on the fourth major bleaching event as of the last count, and it's going to get worse. Scientists are basically saying if we don't do something about the coral, then by 2050, we'll probably have lost around 90% of it. And by 2100, there'll be zero left. So if we have the coral that can survive the heat, that's the most resistant coral on the planet, we need to shepherd that and conserve it so that potentially science can determine a way of working out why it's so tolerant to heat. And if we can work out the genetic traits that cause that, maybe there's a way that those can be kind of reinvested, if you like, into development in the Great Barrier Reef. These hugely important ecosystems for our planet, not just for local people. Same thing for the Florida reefs. Maybe there's ways that we can help them. But if it's all gone, yeah, no help at all.
And do
So
you feel
anyhow,
like
it's a
you're,
long-winded answer to
yeah,
your question, but
yeah.
yeah.
And do you feel like your diving school helped raise awareness about the issue? Because a lot of people can just forget what happens underwater. They just live in a big city with a lot of lights. They don't really know what's happening underwater. So if more
I
people
think,
dive, can
yeah.
they see what's actually happening? Can they see the degradation?
Well, that's one of our goals. I mean, this Project Reframe is a community project, basically, and we're trying to get the public, as well as government and academia and schools and citizen scientists, etc. We're trying to get as many people involved in this as possible and make it as open as we can. Um, I grew up, I got a few more gray hairs than you, but I grew up watching Jacques Cousteau and Hansen, Lottie, Haas, and all these people that were filming the ocean for the first time. None of us had seen it before. We had no idea what was underneath those waves. It was fascinating. We were like mesmerized when we were watching this. And there was a whole generation, kind of the whole Gen X, kind of end of the baby boomers and the Gen X guys. We all grew up watching that. And the number of divers you see per capita in our generation is much higher than any subsequent generation because I think everyone's kind of forgotten about it. So yeah, we do give ourselves a bit of a bit of a push to try and get as much out there as we can in terms of, helping people to understand what these things do. We do talks in schools, so we're working with 6-year-olds and up, quite broadly in the UAE. We do kind of boot camps and stuff like that for the kids, but we also do internships for students, for adults. We do courses to help them to understand, the weekend coral warriors, so we can actually train these guys and get them out there. And every single help that we can get from these people is valuable. So education is a big part of what we do.
After 5 years, where do you think Project Reframe is spending most of their resources today? What do you think is the most impactful thing you can do in order to really make a difference?
Um, so
Is it
we,
the education? Is it actually building
yeah. I
artificial
mean,
reefs?
impact is what we're all about. I mean, there are so many people and so many organizations that are talking a lot about the ocean. Um, but I think that, if you express that as a percentage of everyone who's interested in the ocean, so the people who are all talking about it, and then, as a subset, the people who are actually doing something about it, I suspect the doing people are going to be a lot smaller group than the talking people. And but for us, putting action words into action is super important. So we have set ourselves a goal that we want to train a minimum of 150 people per year to scuba dive if they don't already scuba dive, to understand some of the conservation challenges that we have, and then equip them with the tools and the knowledge and the experience for them to go and actually do something under the water. So that's really our goal. And the other sort of flip side of the coin, and every single startup has this problem, is that when you first start, you can come up with all these beautiful little handcrafted processes and stuff that works until a certain scale. And suddenly you realize that, whoa, hang on a second. We have these tables, these nursery tables, which have 126 baby corals on them that we kind of grow out. Think of it like a greenhouse in a garden. Every time we add a table, we're adding another 126 corals into the nursery. Now, we measure every single one of those corals every month. And by measuring, we take photography of it, and then we have a graphic tool where we actually physically draw around the coral so that we understand the size of it. So that's fine when you got a couple of thousand.
Mm.
When you start getting into the tens of thousands, that starts to become difficult. And so I think the phase we're at right now is all about how we can scale this both in human terms, because it is a labor intensive process, like any form of gardening, which is kind of what this is. Um, you can't do gardening with AI, unfortunately. You can work out good ways to garden, but you can't actually do the gardening with it. Um, and there's a limited amount that you can do with robotics as well, measurements and stuff like that. Yeah, we can use drones and things for that, but actually gardening the corals, we haven't got robotics that are good enough to do that underwater at this point in time. So um, we need a lot of humans, or close relations to humans that can pass themselves off as humans. We need a lot of people helping us out. We have opportunities for people who want to get underwater. We also have opportunities for people who can't or don't want to get into the water, the sciencey sort of stuff, the data side of things. Um, and yeah, the other side of it is, every single growing company's challenge is, how do you keep the cash flow running in an environment where scalability is it's kind of a bit of a linear thing. the more stuff you add underwater, the more people you need. Well, the more people you need, the more training you need. The training needs to be paid for, and so does the number of people. So as you get bigger, there are some ways that we can get leverage and kind of multipliers where, by adding technology in, we can grow 25% and kind of keep the effort manageable. There are other areas where it's literally linear. We if we get bigger, we need more people, we need more process, we need more money. So yeah, it's the constant juggling act of, how do we get bigger and how do we, get more sponsors involved and keep
How
them
involved
involved.
is the government? Because this
Not at all.
region historically has been a pearl diving region. So diving for them is quite, it's part of their culture.
Yeah.
And so
We
are they trying to
we
help?
no, we don't see any we don't see any financial assistance from the government. Um, we we have partnerships with the government, particularly with the Ministry of Climate Change and Environment, with their Marine Environment Research Department. But those are more collaboration around sort of scientific data and stuff like that. So as we produce stuff, we can share it. They do a lot of their water temperature, water condition surveys and stuff with us. So we have a kind of collaboration going there. But in terms of investing to save the coral, there is no government. Everything that we've done. I mean, I personally funded the initial wave, and then we've been fortunate enough to find some corporates who have great CSR programs or ESG programs that have been willing to to fund something that's a little bit different from the standard beach cleanup and mangrove planting.
Mhm. I'm curious, have you been in different places around the world that are facing the same issues? And maybe they found some more more practical, lower cost solutions that worked because this has been going on for decades. It's not a new problem. So there's probably something that worked around the world that you can replicate here. Or is the water way too hot to compare it to other region?
So it's kind of interesting. There does need to be an adaptation, and it's how we spent the first 18 months on the project was doing a lot of research into um, projects that are running in other parts of the world. So we had people that had worked in Thailand on projects, in South Africa on projects, some of them in the Caribbean. So they all came with their different methods and their different approaches. But the sea is different in each place. So in the Caribbean, you can see 30 meters under the sea. It's perfectly clear water. And, unless you get kind of a hurricane or whatever, a lot of these bays are pretty protected. And so there's not a huge amount of rough seas. So you can use methods that are um, less robust, if you like, than the methods we need to use, where, yeah, we've got really hot water, we've got a lot of nutrients in the water. And let's put it this way, if we had to choose between Evian and lentil soup, we're probably closer to the lentil soup side than the Evian side in terms of water clarity. So that has an effect on light availability. And obviously we spoke about, the little algae in corals needing sunlight. We can't plant as deep as you can in the Caribbean. So we need to have different methods. We also have some pretty ripping storms every winter that come in off the Indian Ocean. Um, in fact, our first structures, um, yeah, our first structures, we had a massive storm. I'm trying to remember the name of it now, it's escaping me. Literally 10 days after we put our first 10 structures down, it just wiped everything out. And there was nothing left. We just had a pile of metal that had been taken apart by this
Wow.
huge storm. And over the 5 years, we've learned from this. So we started off, adapting methods internationally, but then what we did was started to adapt our own methods because, when you get a bunch of tables trashed, you got to start looking at them and saying, hey, how do I make these stronger? How do I make these more resistant? Am I making the right height? Do I need to put different kinds of welds in there? What's the best way to do this? And so I think we're on version 6 now, just of a basic table. And every time we kind of adapt it and, learn something. So yeah, they're kind of like battle tanks now. They seem pretty solid. They don't back down in storms anymore. Um, Similar thing with the artificial reefs that we were building. We did a lot of what I call pretty reefs. At the beginning, we had some beautiful sculptures of like we did octopus, we did whale sharks, we had turtles, and these were sculptures that we made in-house out of rebar, steel rebar, and they are really nice. They look gorgeous. They're great on Instagram. They're not necessarily the most efficient thing in terms of the use of the space that we have, because we have to license the space from the government and pay for it. So, yeah. And so now we've actually developed new systems that allow us to be far more efficient with the square meters that we have and get more coral into the same space. It might not look so pretty, but the impact is a lot higher. We're actually generating better results from it in terms of the amount of coral we produce. So, there's been an evolution all the way through, in terms of the types of people, in terms of the methods, the materials we use, the way we put the materials together. It never stops. And to your point, we realized a long time ago that it's all about simplification. Our longer term goal is to take the methods that we've documented and built and make them available to, ocean communities or coastal communities, I should say, that have coral. Um, if you look at where most of that is, it's not in highly developed parts of the world. A lot of it might be sitting around an island nation that, might be running on a diesel generator, the smaller places.
Yeah.
So bringing drones and artificial intelligence in there might not be the best approach, whereas bringing in some good old nuts and bolts and metal and stuff like that that they can put onto a small boat, that's what they need. And they need the methods to do that with materials they can actually obtain in the place that they live and work. So we've had that in mind all the way through, and we've actually documented all of that into a handbook that as soon as we're ready, we're going to start taking that out and hopefully helping other people like ourselves to build their own little community projects wherever they happen to be.
That's really fascinating. I mean, I kind of feel that your tech background with A/B testing different solutions is kind of showing here.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I want to end with this, Daryl. If people want to help and volunteer,
Hmm.
what can they actually do?
Okay. So, if they are divers, then we can teach them how to do the stuff that we do. So that is go out and rescue coral that's naturally broken on reefs, check it for disease, and then bring it to the nursery so that we can quarantine it and then grow it back if it's healthy. Um, Learn how to propagate coral underwater. So how to work the farm. Basically, how do we plant it? How do we maintain it? Um, and for the really keen kids, then we basically get to learn how to do the measurements as well. So how do we take the pictures? How do we actually do the measures? Now that stuff, once we have the photos and things for the surveys every month, those can then be handed to people who don't really want to get their feet wet. People who are more on land, who are more maybe sciencey sort of oriented. We're working with a couple of secondary school classes on this as well. So, it doesn't have to be adults. It can be anyone who has a reasonable grip on maths and can, draw around a coral, basically. So we also have opportunities for people who would like to help us to grow. People who want to work with us to find, interested corporates or, other organizations who want to get involved in sponsorship and stuff. Um, yeah, there's lots of different ways that people can get involved. I think the key thing for us at this point in time is getting the word out there as much as we can. So having people talking to each other about this is, yeah, absolutely golden for us. Because generally speaking, what we found is as soon as people start saying, hey, we're working on this coral project. And I, what? Coral? That's kind of unusual. I mean, what are you doing? And then, it sort of sparks interest. Um, so yeah, the more we can get the word out there and basically get as many people involved as possible, because people have lives, they have kids, they have brunches, they have all the other stuff that they do on weekends in Dubai. They're not going to come up and do our stuff every week. So the more people we can get into a rotation, so that we
Mhm.
have like some decent coverage in and out of the water, the better we can expand and scale.
Darryl, thank you so much. This was really fascinating. I really love what you do, and I'm looking forward to see the impacts of what your company is doing.
Yeah, well, we produce impact reports every quarter. So yeah,
Amazing. Thank you so
all
much.
science based. Thank you very much, Antoine.